The text came in while I was on a ladder checking a roof line. "You're not walking me down the aisle. Abigail thinks you'll embarrass us. Just sign off on the permit paperwork and stay home." I climbed down slow, read it again. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me more than the text did. "I'm Riley Thompson, 34. I run a small construction firm outside Denver. Permits, structural work, the boring stuff nobody thinks about until a deck collapses at a party. My little sister, Phoebe, is 29 and about to marry into the Howe family, old Lake Tahoe money, the kind that's owned the same stretch of shoreline for 4 generations. 6 months ago, Phoebe called me crying. The Howes wanted to build a private event pavilion on their bluff property for the wedding. Glass walls, a 60-foot cantilever over the water, the kind of thing that photographs beautifully and fails inspection instantly. No local contractor would touch it without a licensed engineer's stamp on the plans, so I stamped them. I pulled the county permit under my own license. I personally signed the liability bond that let that structure legally exist. That was 6 months ago. Today, standing in a stranger's driveway with grease on my hands, I found out I wasn't invited to see it finished. I didn't call her. I didn't call our mom, who I guarantee already knew. I got in my truck, sat in the parking lot, and pulled up the county building department's website on my phone. My license number was still attached to that permit. My bond was still the only thing keeping that pavilion legal to stand on. All I had to do was call one office and ask them to pull it. I didn't do it that night. I just sat there, staring at the number, thinking about every unpaid invoice I'd eaten for this family over the years, every "you're the responsible one" they'd used to get out of paying me back. 3 days later, 200 guests would be standing on that bluff, and the woman whose name was legally holding the ground under their feet wouldn't even be on the guest list anymore. If you want to see what happens when Riley makes that call, subscribe, it's coming. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop it below. Morning. I sat in my truck outside the county permits office, engine off, coffee already going cold in the cup holder. I'd been up since 5, running the same conversation in my head on a loop, trying to talk myself out of it. I didn't talk myself out of it. Inside, I asked for the clerk who'd processed the original paperwork. When she came to the counter, I slid my license number across to her. "I need to withdraw my stamp and bond from a project, effective immediately." She typed something, then looked up. "This is the Howe Pavilion out on the bluff?" "That's the one." "Ma'am, I have to tell you, pulling this removes their legal occupancy. They can't hold an event on that structure without a licensed engineer of record. If your name comes off, the whole thing shuts down." "I understand." She studied me for a second, like she was waiting for me to change my mind. I didn't. She printed the withdrawal form, I signed it, and just like that, 6 months of unpaid work stopped being my problem. I sat back in the truck afterward and didn't drive off right away. I thought I'd feel something bigger. Guilt, maybe. Fear. Instead, there was just a strange, quiet stillness, like setting down a bag I'd been carrying so long I forgot how heavy it was. That stillness didn't last long. By 11, my phone started buzzing. First, it was the railing contractor, a guy named Dennis who'd been finishing the glass panels. "Hey, county just red-tagged the site. Crew got turned away at the gate. You know what's going on?" I didn't answer. Not because I was hiding, I just didn't have anything to say to him. It wasn't his fight. By 1, the caterer's number popped up. I let it ring out. By 2, it was a number I didn't recognize, and when I finally picked up, it was Abigail Howe's assistant, using the kind of tone people use when they're trying very hard not to sound panicked. "We're seeing some kind of hold on the county's website for the pavilion. I'm sure it's a clerical error on their end. Could you call the office and get it sorted?" "There's no error. I withdrew my stamp and bond this morning. I'm no longer the engineer of record. Silence on the other end, long enough that I almost thought the call had dropped. I see, she said finally, and hung up. I drove home after that, made myself dinner, real dinner, sitting down, no phone next to my plate for the first time in longer than I could remember. It felt almost illegal how normal it was. Then, a little before 10, my phone lit up on the counter. Not Phoebe, not Abigail. Mom. What did you do? 3 words, no question mark, like she already had the verdict written out and just wanted me to confirm it. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about typing something back, an explanation, a defense, the receipts I could have listed off the top of my head, every deck I'd built for free, every invoice I quietly written off, every time "you're the responsible one" was code for "you don't get to say no." I didn't type any of it. I turned the phone face down on the counter and left it there. Out on the bluff, 200 miles from my kitchen table, the pavilion sat dark for the first time since construction started. No work lights, no generator hum, nothing but wind coming off the water and a red tag stapled to the gate. 3 days till the wedding, and somewhere in that big house behind the bluff, I was fairly sure my sister still didn't know that the ground under her wedding day had just legally stopped existing. Phoebe called at 7:12 the next morning. I let it ring twice before I picked up, mostly to prove to myself I could. "What is wrong with you?" Her voice was already cracking, that high, thin sound she gets when she's more scared than angry, even if anger is what comes out first. "Dennis says the whole site is shut down. The wedding planner is losing her mind. Mom says you did something at the county office." I withdrew my stamp. I'm not the engineer of record anymore. The pavilion isn't legally safe for occupancy without one. "So put it back." "I can't unsign a withdrawal. It doesn't work that way." "Then find someone else. Call one of your engineer friends. Get them to sign off. I don't care what it costs." "You'd need someone to inspect 6 months of construction, verify the load calculations on a 60-foot cantilever over open water, and be willing to personally guarantee it under 3 days. Nobody's doing that, especially not for free." There was a silence on the line so complete I could hear the wind on her end. She was probably standing outside, staring at the bluff. "You did this on purpose," she said quietly, "because I didn't want you at the wedding." "I did this," I said, "because I found out the day before I was uninvited that I was still legally responsible for 200 people standing on a structure I built for free. Those 2 things happened 3 hours apart, Phoebe. Connect the dots yourself." She hung up on me. I set the phone down on the kitchen table and stared at it, waiting for the guilt to show up. It didn't. By 10 that morning, the calls had multiplied. Not to me, around me. I wasn't answering anyone but Phoebe, but I still had a few contacts left in that world, and one of them was Cohen's cousin, James Mason, a soft-spoken guy who'd always treated me like an actual person instead of hired help. He texted instead of calling. "Hey, not trying to get in the middle of it, but you should know Abigail's telling people you sabotaged this out of jealousy. Thought you'd want a heads up." I read it twice. Jealousy. That was almost funny, in the way things are funny right before they stop being funny at all. I texted back, "Thanks for the heads up, James. Appreciate you." I didn't defend myself. I didn't have the energy, and more than that, I didn't see the point. The people who mattered would find out the truth eventually. The people who didn't could believe whatever helped them sleep. What I did instead was open my laptop and pull up the folder I'd built out of habit, the same habit that made me good at my job. I kept records of everything. Every permit application, every email where I'd asked in writing whether the house wanted to hire an independent structural firm instead of leaning on family. Every reply from Abigail's office politely declining because Riley's already doing it and family should look out for family. 6 months of paper trail showing exactly whose idea it was to run this whole thing on my signature and nobody else's dime. I didn't send any of it, not yet. I just wanted to know it existed in case I needed it. Around noon, my mother showed up at my door. I hadn't given her my new address. She must have gotten it from Phoebe, or maybe she'd had it for a while and just never used it, because showing up meant admitting I existed outside of what I could do for them. She stood on my porch in a coat that cost more than my monthly mortgage, her face tight in a way I recognized from every financial emergency our family had ever had. "You need to fix this," she said before I'd even said hello. "There's nothing to fix, Mom. There's a process. It takes weeks, not days." "Weeks? Riley, the wedding is in 2 days. 200 guests. The Howes have already spent—" She caught herself, but I knew where that sentence was going. Not "the Howes have already spent so much money." She was about to say "so much of your money," and even now some old reflex told her not to say it out loud, like admitting it made it worse. "I know exactly how much they've spent. I signed the bond, remember?" Her jaw tightened. "You're punishing your sister for one text message." "I'm not punishing anyone. I withdrew my professional liability from a structure I have no legal or financial reason to keep backing. That's not revenge. That's just me stopping." "Stopping what?" I looked at her for a long moment, and something in my chest went very still and very clear, the way it does right before you say something you can't take back. "Stopping being the only one in this family who ever has to actually pay for anything." She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there, coat pulled tight around her, looking at me like she was seeing a stranger on her own daughter's porch. Then her phone rang. She glanced at it, and whatever color was left in her face drained out completely. "It's the bank," she said, almost to herself. "About the shop." I felt something cold move through me. "What about the shop?" She didn't answer. She just turned and walked back to her car, phone pressed to her ear, her voice dropping into the kind of tight, careful tone people use when they already know the news is bad and are just waiting to hear how bad. I stood on my porch, watching her drive away with the distinct sinking feeling that whatever was happening on that call had nothing to do with a wedding pavilion at all, and everything to do with a mistake my mother had made that I didn't know about yet. I found out what the bank call was about 2 hours later, and not from my mother. It was James again. You might want to sit down for this one. He explained it in pieces, the way people do when they're still putting it together themselves. When the pavilion shut down, Phoebe and Abigail had scrambled to find a fast fix, a private lender who specialized in emergency event financing, the kind of place that charges obscene interest and doesn't ask many questions if you can put up collateral fast. Phoebe didn't have collateral. Neither did Abigail, not liquid enough to move in 2 days anyway. My mother did. Her shop, the little flower and gift store she'd run for almost 20 years, the one I'd quietly covered the lease on more than once when a slow month hit, was sitting there with a clean title, free and clear because I'd helped her pay it off 3 years ago as a birthday present. She'd put it up as collateral for a wedding, for my sister, without telling me, without telling anyone, apparently, until the loan officer called that morning to confirm the paperwork and mentioned, almost in passing, that the loan required a co-signer with an active professional license to satisfy the lender's risk requirements for an unfinished structure. They'd used my name, not with my permission, not with a phone call, a text, a single word of warning. Someone, most likely Phoebe, maybe with Abigail's blessing, had pulled old paperwork from the original county permit, the one that still had my license number sitting on it before I withdrew it, and submitted it to the lender as part of the application. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, hands very still, and pulled up my firm's compliance portal. It only took a few minutes to confirm what I already knew in my gut. My license number was attached to a $180,000 loan application I never seen, never signed, never agreed to. That's not a family dispute. That's fraud. I didn't scream. I didn't call Phoebe and demand an explanation. I did what I do for a living. I documented everything. Screenshots, timestamps, the original withdrawal form from the county, the loan application with my forged signature on page 4. I saved it all to 3 separate places, because that's what you do when you know a piece of paper might be the only thing standing between you and someone else's mess becoming your prison sentence. Then I called the lender directly. I need to report unauthorized use of my professional license on an active loan application, I said, and gave them the file number James had passed along. The woman on the other end went very quiet, then very formal. "Ma'am, can you confirm you did not authorize this signature?" "I can confirm that, and I can send you the county withdrawal paperwork proving I had no active bond on that structure as of 2 days ago. Whoever signed my name did it after I'd already pulled out. We'll need to freeze the application pending review." "Please do." I hung up and sat there in the quiet of my kitchen, staring at the wall, feeling something shift under my ribs. Not satisfaction, not yet. Something closer to grief. Because somewhere in the last 24 hours, my little sister had crossed a line I genuinely hadn't believed she was capable of crossing. Not out of desperation, out of the belief that my name, my signature, my whole professional life was just another resource that belonged to the family whenever they needed it. My phone buzzed. Phoebe. "Please don't do anything. I panicked. I didn't think it would actually go through. I just needed the bank to say yes so the vendors would stay. Please, Riley, this is my wedding." I read it twice. Then I typed back 4 words, the only ones I had left in me. "You used my name." I didn't send anything else. I turned my phone off completely, not silent, off, and sat in the dark kitchen as the last light went out of the sky, knowing that somewhere across town a fraud investigation with my sister's name on it had just quietly started moving, and there was no version of tomorrow where I could stop it, even if I wanted to. The investigator called 2 days later, on what should have been Phoebe's wedding day. I was at my kitchen table with actual coffee this time, not the cold truck kind, when my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail out of habit. Something made me pick up. "Ms. Thompson? This is Detective Sarah Coleman, Financial Crimes Division. I have some questions about a loan application filed under your license number." I told her everything. The withdrawal from the county permit, the texts from Phoebe, the screenshots I'd already saved, time-stamped and backed up in 3 places. I sent her the file while we were still on the phone. "This is helpful," she said. "Very helpful. We'd already flagged the application internally. Forged professional credentials on a 6-figure loan tends to get noticed fast. Your report just confirms the timeline." "What happens now?" "Now we investigate who submitted it. Based on the IP logs, that shouldn't take long." I thanked her, hung up, and sat there for a while, not really tasting my coffee anymore. I heard the rest of it in pieces over the following weeks, the way you hear about a car accident you weren't in, secondhand from people who wanted to talk about it more than I did. The wedding never happened. Not on the bluff, not anywhere. Without the pavilion, without the loan, without me quietly holding the whole thing together from the shadows, there was nothing left to build it on. Vendors who hadn't been paid started filing claims. The venue coordinator canceled outright rather than risk her own license getting dragged into a fraud case. Abigail Howe, it turned out, cared a great deal about family loyalty right up until the moment it touched her son's name. Once James's cousin mentioned criminal investigation and identity fraud in the same sentence, Cohen's mother made it very clear, very publicly, that the Howes had no intention of being associated with any of it. The engagement quietly dissolved sometime around the point Cohen stopped returning Phoebe's calls. Phoebe was the one who'd filed the application. The detective confirmed it a month later. Logged in from her own laptop using an old scan of my license she'd pulled from a permit I'd filed for her 3 years earlier, back when I still thought helping her meant something. She hadn't expected me to check. She hadn't expected me to notice, or to care enough to report it, because in her mind I never had before. The fraud charge got negotiated down eventually. First offense, restitution, a lot of expensive lawyers I didn't pay for. But it stayed on her record. It stayed in the county system. It stayed in every background check she'd ever run for the rest of her life. My mother's shop was a different story. The lien held for months while the loan application sat frozen in limbo, and even after it was cleared, the bank flagged her file for review on anything she'd tried to finance afterward. She never said it to me directly, but I heard from an aunt that she'd had to take out a personal loan from an actual bank at an actual reasonable rate using her own name and her own credit for the first time in years, just to keep the shop's lights on. I didn't help her. Not because I wanted her to suffer, because for the first time in my adult life, I let a consequence land exactly where it was supposed to land, instead of stepping in front of it. My mother came by once more about 2 months after everything settled. She looked smaller than I remembered. Not older exactly, just smaller, like some version of herself had gone missing in the last 2 months and hadn't come back. "She didn't know she was going to use your name," she said, standing on my porch again, hands in her coat pockets, instead of reaching for me this time. "I want you to know that." "I believe you," I said, and I meant it. "But you knew about the loan. You knew she needed collateral fast, and you didn't ask a single question about where the paperwork for the cosigner came from. You just wanted it to work." She didn't argue. That was new too. "I'm sorry," she said, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, it didn't sound like the opening line of a request for money. "I know," I said. "I'm not ready to do anything with that yet, but I heard it." She nodded like that was more than she'd expected and left it there. She didn't ask me to fix the shop. She didn't ask me to call a lawyer for Phoebe. She just got back in her car and drove away. And this time, I didn't feel the cold, sinking dread I used to feel watching her taillights disappear down the street. I still think about that first text sometimes, "Don't bother showing up, you'll ruin the photos," and how small a thing it was to break something so much bigger than a wedding. Not because the text itself was so cruel. Cruelty like that had been happening for years, just quieter, wrapped in phrases like, "You're the responsible one," and "family helps family." What broke was simpler than that. I stopped being willing to disappear so everyone else could look good in the picture. I didn't lose a wedding that never should have existed on my signature in the first place. I didn't lose a sister who'd been willing to forge my name the moment it was convenient. What I got back, standing in my own kitchen with my own coffee going cold in my own time, was the simple, unfamiliar weight of a life that finally belonged only to me.